Hello, this is a tutorial for the bird spawner component. So to start off, what I've got here is the third person character template in UE5, and I've deleted all the assets that are loaded into the level when that first loads up. And the only thing I've kept is this big cube which acts as our landscape, and I've made that much larger. I've got two cubes here just to show the different areas we're going to have, which is meadow and forest, and that's it. So there's two main features in the bird spawner component. One is a feature that handles 2D ambiances based on where the player is, and the other is spawning birds in random locations around the player. What I'll go over first is the ambience controller. So these are the assets that come in the bird spawner plugin. So if we go to blueprints, what we need in first is a world ambience tracker. So if I drop this in, this will just basically track where the player is, what zone they're in, and what sound should be played. So we only need one of those in, and it needs to be in the persistent level. It also has a default area background sound. So if the player's not in any designated zone, it will still play a sound. So for this one, we'll just add in the meadow sound. And these sounds are just in meta sounds inside the plugin and ambiances. And then if we spawn in a default area, and we should get the meadow background sound. Next, what we need to do is add in zones for the meadow and the forest. So if I drag in this ambient zone, I'll make it a bit larger to cover that whole area. I'll also make it overlap with this other area a little bit, because in a use case scenario, you're going to have overlapping zones. And the information we need to fill out on this is just the name, which is the meadow, and the sound for that ambient area. So again, that'll be meadow, just like the default area. And then what we'll do is we'll copy that over for the forest. And we'll type in forest and the forest background sound. So what you can do is you can duplicate this and make areas for the meadow and the forest, and then just drop those straight in rather than duplicating these instances. It might make it a bit easier than filling in this information each time, and then saves making a mistake with that. But just for this example, we'll just copy it across. So if I spawn in, we've got the meadow sound playing, and if we go over into the meadow, we should cross over into another meadow sound. So if you cross over from one zone to another matching zone, so if I cross from a meadow to a meadow, it wouldn't fade out and in the sound. It's only because we've moved from the default area to a meadow that it will fade in and out, but it's an equal power crossfade anyway, so there shouldn't be any noticeable change if you're going from one sound to the same sound. So if we go over to the forest, or switch over to the forest sound, and now this takes a couple of seconds to register, and that's intentional. So there's a 4-second timer to switch between ambiances, and the reason that's been done is if the player hangs around the boundary of a zone, it doesn't keep trying to fade in and fade out the two different sounds. It will wait to alleviate any problems with that. So then if we go back into this crossover area, we've just crossed over into the meadow, so it should play that meadow sound instead. And that's it for the ambience section. So moving on to the bird spawning section. If we go to our third person character, we add the bird spawner components. This is the area where you'll need to fill out all the information based on how you want it to behave. So firstly, the spawn interval for the birds. This is how often should it check if to destroy a bird if it's out of the distance, or spawn a new bird. You can set this based on how resource intensive you want the component to be. You can set it to a lower number if you want it to be less resource heavy, or a smaller number if you want it to check more often what it should do with the birds. the bird kill distance. So how far does a player have to be away from the bird for it to be marked to be destroyed. Enable landscape detection. So this will enable a line trace which will shoot down and up from where the bird tries to spawn to check that it's not been spawned underneath the ground. So this is useful if you have terrain that changes a lot on its z-axis. So if I'm standing next to a hill, I wouldn't want a bird spawning underneath that hill. So if I turn on this, it will detect that I'm next to a hill, and it will spawn the bird above the landscape. So if you have that on, this needs to be set to the object type of the landscape. So for this, I've created a new object type, which is a landscape. So on the map here, if I go to this cube here, and then I edit that, and then on the collision settings here, you can see that the object type is a landscape. So that's set accordingly on here. Or you can turn it off, and then just in general, it will spawn the bird at a random height above the player. But we'll have it on for this in this case. That's why I've spaced out this landscape quite a lot. So if you're on the boundary, it's going to try and find, if it tries to spawn a bird over here, it's going to try and find the landscape, and it won't be able to find it. So it will spit out a warning in the output log, but it will still spawn it fine. It will just spawn it at a random height above the player. But best to have that off if you've got lots of drops off at the side of your landscape. So into this section for the zones, this is an array which stores the information for each zone. It automatically adds a default zone, but for this we'll leave has birds to off, so that zone won't have any birds in it. We'll add 2 zones for the meadow and the forest. So the name of this one is meadow, the name of this one is forest, and these need to match the names in the ambient zones that we set earlier. So the data table is the data asset that dictates what birds should be spawned in each area. So we'll set this one to meadow, we'll set this one to forest, and if we browse to them, these are created by just going to miscellaneous data table and then basing them off the struct bs bird struct. So if I open meadow here, so each row is for the name of the bird that you're trying to spawn and the bird actor for that specific bird. So if I take a look at this actor, so these actors are created by going to the blueprint class BS bird actor. So these ones are in the plugin already. So if I open the Chrome, you'll need to enter the bird sound here. So these are the bird meta sounds. These are all based off a preset that's found in here. So if you want to create any new ones, you can base them off that preset. If I go back to our crow, so I've set the crow sound in there, and then in here we need to set the spawn times. So there's initial spawn time and then a spawn time which is on a loop. So the initial spawn time I've set to a lower one than this loop here. So what will happen is when the bird first spawns, it will take into account these 2 times, and then after that first time it plays, then it will enter into this min and max time. The reason it does that is because if you don't have an initial spawn time, the player can outrun the birds if every bird sound minimum time is set too high. So if this is set to say a minimum of 20 seconds for each bird, if you just keep running, you'll be able to outrun the birds before they play for their play the first time. So this alleviates that issue, and you can have it play at a shorter interval for the first time after it spawns. And then you can set this for a longer delay between each time it plays. So we've got different birds set up here, and these are all entered into the meadow data table. And then again, we've got one for the forest over here. This has got a few more birds in than the meadow. So if we go back to the third person character, zone has birds. Basically, if you want that zone to play birds or not. For the meadow and the forest, we'll leave that to 1. Max bird count is how many birds you want to be able to spawn at any one time. So I'll leave that to 5 for this one, and I'll change it to 7 for the forest. And a single bird instance is, do you want the bird spawner to only spawn 1 instance of each bird at any one time? I quite like that set, so that I don't have any duplicate birds singing at any one time. So one thing you do need to be careful of is making sure that you have enough birds in your data asset to satisfy the max bird count. So say if I only had 4 birds in my data asset and I set the max bird count to 5, having single bird instance checked, it doesn't have enough options to fulfill this quota of 5 birds. So that'll spit out an error in the output log. So just make sure you've got enough birds in your data table to satisfy the max bird count, or have single bird instance off. So that's everything set that we need. So if I go over to our zones, spawn in here in the default area. So in here we have no birds playing because we've set has birds to false. Then if I move over to the meadow area, I'll just search BS in our outliner here, you can see that 5 birds have spawned. And if we move over to this area, we'll see that now it's spawned more birds, but then it's still got those previous ones still there. And the reason why that happens is because the birds are destroyed when they next try to play. So if I've spawned a couple of birds and then moved from that area, the next time they try to play, if I'm out of the bird kill range, they'll be destroyed instead of playing their sound. So we should see one of those crows go shortly when it figures out that it's out of range. So yep, there it goes. So if we go over to the forest area, the forest has got a couple of extra birds in, like a woodpecker and a nightingale. So yeah, straight away you can see the nightingale has been spawned and there's a woodpecker in there. So it should get rid of those duplicate birds from the meadow when it figures out they're out of range. So yeah, you can see those being destroyed now. And then if we carry on and we leave the forest area, eventually it should destroy all of those birds now, because we're in an area that doesn't have any birds and they're all out of range. So you can see those being destroyed now. And that's everything for the bird spawner component.